I'm John Hewitt of ProWare.com, and today's podcast is about some common technical writing problems that you can run into. As a longtime technical writer, I've created documentation that I've been very proud of. I've also created documentation that wasn't as good as it should have been. Sometimes, it was not very good at all. It happens. No matter how good your intentions are when you set out, something goes wrong in the process and the documentation doesn't turn out as good as it should have been. All you can do at that point is try to correct your mistakes and try to learn from them. I like to think I've learned a substantial amount from my mistakes over the years. Here's some common things that you might run into. Number one is poor organization. No matter how good your information is, it's useless if your reader can't find it. You have to pay attention to the flow of the information, make your information easy to search, and provide an exhaustive index. Make sure that your information is available in the format that your reader wants to access it in. Whether you're creating web pages or blog posts, online help files, podcasts, PDFs, print books, you need to make sure that the information is easy to access. You need to anticipate the way that your customer, your reader, your user is going to approach the material. Whenever possible, you should try to observe your audience and find out how are they using your documentation. Are they even using your documentation? Do they skip around? Do they follow it in order? Information like that can be very useful to you. Another problem that you run into with technical documentation is inaccurate information. This happens all the time on technical projects. Somebody writes down that step one is do this and it's wrong, but nobody bothers to correct it all the way down the line until maybe you run into it and say, okay, well, the user script says start with this, but you really have to start 2 steps back, otherwise they're not going to know what's going on. Or they wrote that your step is to click on this hyperlink when it turns out you're supposed to click on that button. Inaccurate information can go on and on and on for a long time until somebody finds it and corrects it. Same with outdated information. Usually documentation projects, they start with a product that's in development, and as the product develops over time, changes are made to the documentation, and they're not always tracked. Nobody tells you as a technical writer that this changed, and you don't find out for too long, or you don't do enough research on your own to say, okay, go to the people who are working on the project and you say, what has changed, and you try to get a list and say, okay, well, these are the changes they've made to the user interface, these are the changes they've made to the back end, and here's how these things are going to play out. Hopefully you get all of that information, but that's a common problem, is that something gets missed because it's changed over time and you didn't get the memo. Incomplete information is a pretty common problem with technical documentation. Users often need more information than you give them. This could be just because they're beginners, or because actually they're advanced users and they say, okay, well, those are the obvious facts. Tell me something I don't know. And this often happens because of time limitations on the project, space limitations in the help, where you're only allowed so much space to write, especially it's in the days of the print manual. Print manuals are starting to go away, and thank God, because they're really, for the most part, a waste of paper, because most people don't use them, and the people who do use them, if they have one book that's never been updated, they're never going to get new information. And it's far better to have something online that can be updated whenever a change is made to the product. And your goal should be to tell users everything they need to know, but without overwhelming them. This is especially true when a lot of people have problems that they can tell the user how to do something, but the fault comes when you start trying to tell the user why to do something. That step 1 follows, or step 2 follows step 1, but you don't know why they made that choice, or you don't explain to them why they made that choice. And that's the sort of, the why information often gets lost in the process. Bad sentence structure is another problem with information, and usually the problem here is that sentences are just too long. when you're working with technical documentation, it's good to, avoid compound sentences. Have each sentence make one point and one point only, and then move on. And this can be hard for some people because it makes the writing feel a little bit choppy, but it's a clarity issue, not a style issue. It's something that you need to do in order to make the document, point by point, this is what you do, this is what you do, without confusing somebody and writing something that they have to reinterpret every time they read. Another problem is unexplained jargon and concepts. This is one of those situations where often you know what the word means, and because you're so used to using it, you assume that the reader knows what the word means, and if they're not a technical person, or even if they're just not somebody who works for your company, that term may be completely beyond them. So you really have to look and go through your documentation and say, okay, what terminology might I miss, and or might a regular reader not be able to deal with? And you need to either create a glossary at the end, that's always very useful, or explain in the text, okay, this means this, explain what the words mean as they're going along. Sometimes you can do that, just using an analogy, saying this is like that, and such. Another problem can be poor word choices. A lot of times there are many words that mean the same basic thing. For example, you may use any of the following words to mean the end: complete, finish, terminate, stop, discontinue, close, cease, conclude, halt. All of these things can basically mean to end, and you are going to have to decide which one most accurately means the end of your process. It's very good to pick exactly the right word, and not, especially when you're creating documentation that's going to be put in translation, you want to use the same word to describe the same process every time, because when a word gets translated, if it has multiple meanings, if you use two words with multiple meanings, you double the chances that one of those words is going to get translated poorly, and the user from another country is not going to be able to understand what you wrote. Nobody's perfect. Don't expect that you're going to write perfect documentation every time. Just try to keep track of what you're doing, and be as voracious as possible in looking up your errors and figuring out exactly what you've done wrong and what can be corrected, what can be improved. So I hope this has been helpful. Thank you. This has been John Hewitt of Polware.com. Come visit the site.